My story's 3 or 4 decades old. It's the only kind I can remember. I'm going to take you to Rochester, New York in the mid-'80s. There's an older brick school building, used to be a grade school. It's been converted now into Rochester's new magnet school for the arts. We walk in, it's not locked. We stroll down the hall, there's a classroom door open, and we listen in. There's a circle of desks and 10 or 15, 20 maybe kids, 9th grade through 12th, sitting around, reading out loud David Mamet's American Buffalo, including all the F-bombs. That's a little unusual in the era of Reagan. The passing bell rings, and we go out in the hall, and the hall fills with kids, age 11 through 18, and 2 boys approaching each other, drop their book bags. One of them slams the other into the lockers. They proceed to beat the hell out of each other for about 15 seconds. Then they calmly pick up their book bags and walk to class. Nobody got hurt. Those guys had skills. So on the way out, we stop, and there's this little black box theater that's been converted from a grade school half gym. And on the door, there's a playbill advertising an upcoming production of The Visit by Friedrich Dürrenmatt. In a high school? Are they kidding? We know the story. The richest woman in the world returns to her hometown and explains to them that the reason they're all destitute and on the dole is because she bought their pencil factory and shut it down. She says she'll open it again, she'll make them all rich. If and only if they kill the guy who is now the leading contender for mayor. Her teenage lover who knocked her up got 2 of his friends to testify that they'd slept with her too, forcing her to leave town in disgrace and sell sex to stay alive. She's still alive, and she's back. She's like a one-woman Me Too movement. Anyway, the then mayor, the incumbent mayor, summons all of his dignity and says, "Oh, no, 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 no. This is Europe. We're civilized. This is not the jungle. We could never do that." But they all start buying luxury goods on credit at her former boyfriend's store. And at the end, after a scene that's a cross between a call and response church service and a Nazi rally, the town's wrestling champ strangles him. Just look it up. It's not as grim as it sounds. There are plenty of good laughs in the second act if you know how to pull them out. Anyway, I didn't make any of that up. Well, that's enough. That all happened in that school. It was a different time. We didn't have to deal with legions of book banning barbarians struggling to be seen strutting on the moral high ground and putting teachers under a microscope. I had total freedom in what I chose for my students to read in my lit classes and in what we chose to put on stage. Until 1992. That's the year we decided, my students and I, to create our own show, and based loosely on the social circus surrounding the case of a serial killer. Not a hypothetical serial killer, a real one, from Rochester. a guy had been seen riding his bike near the school and talking up the cops at the donut shop down the street. You can imagine there was immediate righteous pushback, lots of it. Little meetings that I wasn't privy to. But then I was summoned to a full staff meeting to defend the project. So I took it seriously. It was a hopeless cause, but I took it seriously. I stood on a tabletop. That was 32 years ago. You know, I was a little more spry. I explained to them that what we were doing was akin to Saturday Night Live's treatment of the OJ trial, only ours would be funnier and have more bite. I explained that we were not trivializing serial murder. We were targeting those who did trivialize it by exploiting it for profit. The local TV anchors who put on their gravitas faces and led with it whenever they could before turning to lighter topics and laughing at their own unfunny banter. That show's still playing 7 nights a week all across the country. A sheriff who gloried in the limelight, loved publicity, who used the whole thing to further embellish the myth of himself. I know that's kind of inaccessible to you, but that's what we did. There was we were exposing a parole system that placed this guy in Rochester without really telling anybody who he was. That he was a killer with the conscience of a shark. We went after the professional forensic witness industry, in particular, a guy who gathered big bucks all over the country for his reliability in testifying that a defendant couldn't plead insanity because he wasn't a psychopath, merely a sociopath. And we were lampooning a judge and prosecutor who shamelessly exploited the thing to boost their careers. I stressed that we had no interest whatsoever in the killer himself. We gave him a name, Bobby Blight, but beyond that, he was merely he wasn't even human. He was a walking stage prop that looked like a fat, bald, ugly, middle-aged man even when he was in the 7th grade. And he was going to have no lines. If you think that speech might have mollified the opposition, you're dumber than I was. Anyway, the opposition continued, but it turned to obstruction. When I wanted to get into the building to build set on the weekends, suddenly there was a new rule. I couldn't be in the building with students unless there was an administrator present. Shucks, there just wasn't anybody who wanted to do that. This was after a decade of late rehearsals when my students and I were the last people to leave the building, but can't fight that. There was some more insidious, nasty pushback. Students being cornered and being told that they were involved in something bad, immoral, that they were going to embarrass themselves and bring disgrace to the school. And they added, who does Schneider think he is, that he thinks he can write a play? Actually, we weren't presuming to write a play. My students and I were pretty sure we could string together a set of sketches, hold an audience for an hour and a half, tell a story, keep them laughing, and give them something to think about afterwards. Is it going to be a play? We didn't care. Would it get the stamp of approval from Aristotle? That was the least of our concerns. The pushback didn't work. Even there wasn't a single student, not one, who left the project. They knew what we were doing. They understood it. They were having a lot of fun, improvising, creating characters, creating storylines. So we kept going. 3 weeks before opening, a student and I began writing. She wrote 3 scenes in the first act and punched up a bunch of my stuff. At one point, I was up in my office writing the trial scene and sending the pages down one at a time while they, on the stage, were blocking and memorizing them. That's how good those kids were. So, opening night, March 7th, 1992, nearly a full house. We look around. There aren't any administrators here. They're flouting their own rule. I don't confront people. I never asked why, but I think they were assuming it was going to be a disaster. People were going to walk out in droves and blame them on the way, and that they'd be able to shut us down on day 2. Maybe they were thinking they could get rid of me too, or force me to do The Sound of Music as penance. I don't know. Anyway, the show had to go on, so house lights down, stage lights up, the radio's on, Patti Page is singing, tra-la-la, diddly-ay-day, it gives me a thrill to wake up in the morning to the mockingbird's trill. Meanwhile, on stage, Mrs. Blight, Bobby's mother, is trying to fish some pickles out of a jar with a pair of scissors. There's a dog howling and screaming off stage. She goes over and she says, "Bobby, get that dog off the barbecue." And she goes back to the pickles. There's a knock on the door, and Mrs. Gooey, the grade school counselor, is there. She's brought in an iron pipe that Bobby used to attack the other children on the school bus. Mrs. Blight grabs the iron bar, hurls it into the wings with a lot of clatter, breaks down sobbing about how those children on the bus pick on her boy. And of course, Mrs. Gooey is very sympathetic. She soothes her, and by the end of the scene, they're both happily looking forward to bingo night at church. And the scene change is covered by Bing Crosby singing, "I love those dear hearts and gentle people who live in my hometown, because those dear hearts and gentle people will never, ever let you down." Nobody here remembers that, right? Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to recount the whole play. I'd hate that, and so would you. There were some unique bits that we did. There was a plea bargaining scene that was written entirely in rhymes. There was a set of parole board hearings staged as musical chairs. And weirdest of all, there was a sort of dress parade for jurors. They'd come downstage and pose while 2 local TV celebrities in evening gowns told us about them. How they had that one special quality you need in a high-profile case, people who were intelligent but uninformed. Anyway, the play ended. It was, I didn't. No, I just called it a play. I shouldn't have called it a play. It ended with Bobby convicted of murdering 37 fishermen in the Genesee River Gorge. The judge is about to pronounce sentence, but there's a camera crew up there, and she has to wait for them because they're shooting a political ad for her. They give her a cue, and she solemnly, magisterially intones, "Mr. Blight, you have held center stage in this community for far too long." That's the cue for the curtain call, the whole cast coming on stage, doing the hokey pokey and turning themselves around. That's the play. Nobody walked out. It garnered more catch you by surprise, legitimate laughs per minute than any show the school had ever done. And those brave, smart kids who did that are now near 50. But I think if you ask them if they were harmed in any way, morally, emotionally, socially, by that experience or by reading all of those Band in the Bible Belt plays I made them read, I think they'd say, absolutely not.